I'm sorry.
My dad went there, so. Thanks, everybody, for being here. My name is Alex Renfro. I'm very happy to talk to you today about Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, PPACA, ACA, Obamacare, healthcare reform. A lot of different names. I'm probably going to say Obamacare a lot because it's the easiest name to say, and I think it's politically neutral these days. So I'll start there. My goal with this presentation is to provide you education on the law, provide you information on how your clients will be affected by the law, specifically your business clients, and things that you can do to assist them. This could be opportunities for LBMC, or it could just be good client relations that help solidify your position as a trusted advisor. So I'll begin with the very basics. Again, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I'm going to have a general theme throughout this discussion because there will be things that we talk about that don't make good common sense, or they seem very much different than we might normally think of something, such as a full-time worker working 30 hours a week instead of 40. There are reasons for this. It's not just government nonsense. And the reason is that this is a cost-shifting statute. There's a lot of information and claims about how Obamacare is going to save money, and I'm not going to get too into it. I'm going to try and stay out of, as much as I can, the political side of this. But just sticking with the factual side, there's not a lot of cost savings here. In fact, there doesn't look to be any, and there may be in the future, but that's something we're just going to have to see about. Instead, what's happening is that the government had a goal. They saw that a lot of individuals in this country didn't have health care, and they saw that a lot of individuals had health care, but they deemed it to be not good enough health care. They wanted to fix that problem. How do you fix that problem? Well, you make people buy better health care. Well, what if they can't afford it? That's where we get to this bill. So if you can't afford it, you have to shift the costs onto someone else. The two targets that they shifted those costs onto were first employers, because historically in this country people access health care through their employer, and the government. They were going to contribute as well. But the government's also writing this law, so they're saying to themselves, do we really want to take the whole tab if we have to? Or do we want to take as much as we maybe should or could? No, we're going to shift it back onto employers where we can. So that's why your clients are probably seeing this double squeeze of having to cover their employees and having to deal with these government regulations. That's why we will discuss things such as your clients who would be a small and a large employer at the same time. Doesn't make any sense, right? But it's possible under this law. We'll get into exactly how. And the reason is the government is trying to put pressure on businesses to contribute financially to the health care of their employees. So this has been a law since 2010, but it's been implemented over a number of years. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anyone. Over that time, it has been challenged in a number of different areas. So far, it's withstood every challenge, which is very important to what we call the permanence of Obamacare, which is a new kind of trending term in this field. But what we mean by that is it passed the Supreme Court, it passed the presidential election, and it was very much an issue because when it carries the incumbent's name on it and the incumbent wins re-election, that's probably because of that law, or at least in part. And now the defunding effort and the government issues that we're seeing even today, Obamacare has mostly been taken off the table. My latest updates on this, and this is 5 minutes before we got started, says that the only real changes to Obamacare we may see in the deal that's coming or is present in the Senate right now is increased verification for checking whether individuals qualify for government subsidies on state exchanges. So the defunding, the repeal, the congressional plan, the durable or the medical equipment tax, all of that stuff is out of this deal as far as we know right now. They haven't officially released it yet, so this may change even within the next hour while we're sitting here. So that's where we are. But what I'd like to note is that with every passing day, this law becomes more and more of a permanence and less of something that you can simply repeal or take away. This is the same thing that happened back in the 60s with Medicare and Medicaid. The highly controversial programs at the time. Nowadays, they're considered permanent. Nobody's talking about taking them away. To do so any politician would tell you is political suicide. So it's not something that we're likely going to see in Obamacare if it makes it far enough, right? If it passes enough challenges. So right now, the state exchanges are opening. People are signing up on them. Maybe not on the federal website, it's had some issues, but each state has their own websites. Navigators, who we'll talk about more in this presentation, have their own websites, and they're doing web-based enrollment at a high rate. I don't have all the exact numbers, but I know in Kentucky they've been signing up over 1,000 people a day on Kentucky's individual exchange, which is a pretty good rate. So when you have people getting involved in this system to such a large extent, the question becomes, where do you put them if you take it away? And that's really where we see permanence. So there will be a midterm election, there will be another presidential election where this is maybe an issue, but the issue is not just going to be we need to take it away before it becomes a big problem by the detracting party, or maybe by Republicans, if I can say that, because they tend to advocate against this bill. But it will also be a question of we can't just take it away because where are these people going to go? That's going to be a new line in the narrative. What are we going to do with the people who are already on exchanges? And unless there's a clear solution for that, there's probably not going to be a lot of support for simply getting rid of it. So are we already at permanence? Maybe, but we're not going to know it for a while, is how I view this issue. So 2014 is one of the key implementation years. There are a lot of things going to affect then. There was going to be something very important to your clients that's been delayed, and that is the employer mandate. Now, one thing I'll just note in passing is that I have a number of citations here, and I'm actually very, very excited to speak to a crowd who's not afraid to see code sections in PowerPoints. So I will be referring a lot because there's so much miseducation and misinformation in this law, and I want to talk about some of the more common things that I hear as far as misinformation. That when we want to offer assistance to our clients, we need to make sure it's correct. And the best way to do that is to follow, I guess my basic law when it comes to Obamacare is don't say it unless you can cite it. So if you see the citation, you can read it, you know that it's in the law and that it's current, then you're okay. So that's what we're going to try and do here. And I'll share you some stories of things that I've seen even around town of examples of where people kind of miss the mark or get an idea that maybe doesn't work. So 2014 and 2015, those are going to be your clients' big issues. If you can help solve their problems for those 2 years, going into the future, they will rely on you to assist them in dealing with all of those issues as well. And they'll be maybe a little different in planning, so we'll talk about each. So let's dive into one of the more common issues that your clients are going to be seeing and the challenges that Obamacare raises for businesses. The first is compliance. I always start with compliance. I'm an attorney, I live in compliance. This is what makes me comfortable, but I'm also doing it for two very important reasons. One, you'll notice a lot of ERISA citations or references to ERISA here. The reason for that is if you're trying to amend your plan, and it's a health and welfare plan subject to ERISA, almost everything we deal with in this field is going to be subject to ERISA, then if you have ERISA violations and you're amending your plan, that can make things difficult from a compliance perspective as far as the government's recognition of those amendments. Now, you may be saying or thinking to yourself, yeah, but is the DOL really enforcing this right now? And the answer is not very heavily. They have a lot of budget problems, and this doesn't come from anything they put out in a publication. This just comes from me having friends at the DOL and talking about their enforcement on a one-by-one basis. So yes, it's anecdotal, but it is from the source, so I feel it's reliable enough to share with you. They would love to perform more audits, but they simply don't have the time and expense to do so. And that's on the retirement plan side and especially on the health plan side as well. Instead, they like to rely on the IRS a lot, who does have a pretty good budget for this and is trying to step up their enforcement efforts quite significantly. And we'll talk about a few of the ways they're doing that. But just from a compliance perspective, trying to save money usually means you're amending your plan. Amending a non-compliant plan isn't always permissible under ERISA, so we want to be cautious of that. Second, you're going to have a lot of clients who say, 2013-45, maybe not cited, but they're going to say, the employer mandate's been delayed until January 1, 2015. I don't have to do anything for next year, so I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to send all my employees to the state exchanges, and then at the appropriate time next year, I'm going to institute a plan that takes away that government subsidy, removes any tax liability from myself, and we'll describe that process in detail. And then I'm not going to owe a subsidy. I'll save all this money this year, and next year I'll have my plan, which I have to pay for, but it's at least the best possible economic solution. It's a good idea. The issue I have with it is, and this is a really long site, and I'll give it to you, but I want to make sure that we're very careful about this, and I'll show you exactly where my reasoning comes from. A Health and Human Service Reg, it's 45 CFR 155.310H4. It's one sentence long. It's buried in deep in the stack of papers you see of Obamacare regulations. It's somewhere in there, right? The needle in the haystack. What it discusses in 310H is that when an employer is pre-qualified for government aid, there's a verification process. And now this verification process has been delayed with the employer mandates, and that's from CMS 2334-F because there's no sense in verifying with an employer, according to Health and Human Services, whether they offer a qualified and affordable plan. If I'm speaking too deep in the weeds, I promise I'll elucidate all of this information soon. But basically, when an employee qualifies for government aid, they can cause the employer to see an excise tax from a state exchange plan. If that happens, the state exchange in 310H is supposed to notify the employer that this is going to happen. And H4 says one of the things in that notice must be that the employer has the right to appeal. That's it. What is that appeal going to look like? There's not a lot of information on that. And that's what really scares me as an attorney. Because if you have everybody saying, oh, we're going to put this off until probably October 1 when open enrollment for the state exchange begins again in 2014, there's going to be this flood of employers who say, I don't want people pre-qualifying for aid. So maybe they're on the ball and they do it on October 1st, but they're going to notify the state exchange, I'm trying to appeal either in advance or as my employees qualify for aid. Do they have to do one per employee? Do they have to do one per exchange? Again, not a lot of information. What we do know is the IRS is coming up with these procedures, and it's going to look a lot like an audit. So we're all probably pretty familiar with what an IRS audit looks like. I tend to call these appeals audits because of that. And what we're going to see is the IRS is going to say, okay, employer, you want to prove this to me? We're going to do our little check the box game, and you're going to supply me with all of these documents. Well, guess what happens if you have compliance issues? I'm going to wrap this back around, right? If you have compliance issues, you are, as an employer, because you're saving money, subjecting yourself to what looks a lot to me like a government audit, giving them all of these documents, and they're going to be non-compliant, and they're going to look through those. They're going to have full access to these documents, see the compliance issues, and then they're going to say, you're in trouble, employer. So if you have an employer who says, I'm not going to have a plan next year, that can be a fine strategy, but if they're going to do it, they better have compliance at the top of their list because they're going to have to show what their health program looks like to a state exchange or an IRS official at some point in the next year. So how do we maintain good compliance? We want to have our docs and our procs in order, documents and procedures. A lot of it is ERISA-based, and I don't mean to detract from discussing Obamacare, but I just have to review because you would be startled, or maybe not, to know that insurance companies do not offer ERISA compliance as a service. And many employer plan sponsors will form health plans without a plan document because the insurance company does not provide them with a plan document. They provide them with an insurance contract and an evidence of coverage or certificate of coverage, evidence of benefits. They can call it a lot of different names, but some sort of explanation of what the coverage is going to look like. If you look for something as simple as eligibility rules, it'll say something like the plan sponsor sets eligibility rules. Well, a plan document needs to have basic language, like Firestone language from a Supreme Court case that allows the insurance company to act as a claims fiduciary by the plan sponsor. It's very simple, but without it, you can run into a lot of trouble. And they need things like eligibility rules, which insurance companies don't want to set. They let the employer set them because it's liability if the insurance company engages in this kind of activity. So all of your fully insured clients, simply asking them, hey, do you have a plan document? They might hand you something that they think is a plan document. They might think they're in compliance, but almost always they're not. It's a really big issue. And then I have a number of other documents I've listed here. Summary plan descriptions, material modifications when the plan is amended. Usually you get a new insurance contract every year. You need to issue material modifications for how the plan has changed because you have a new plan. If rates go up, you have to inform your employees about that within 120 days. I mean, this is basic ERISA stuff, but it can come back to hurt employers. Now, why haven't we seen this all over the news, and why aren't employers clamoring for compliance? Well, again, the DOL is in charge of enforcement of a lot of this. And so I never try to go in and scare my clients when I say, hey, we have major compliance issues here, and some of the penalties are $100 per employee per day. That sounds really scary, but if the enforcement is low, the risk appetite is not there to really get a lot of this stuff fixed. And I understand that, even though, again, I'm a compliance guy. I want everything in order. But when you are subjecting yourself to, say, an appeal with the state exchange or the IRS, and you let them know that all of this is wrong, and that it's been wrong, and that the penalties are $100 per employee per day, we've got major issues. Much more than $2,000 per employee per year. We can hit $2,000 really fast at $100 per employee per day. So we want to make sure we're complying with all of these laws. PPACA 1512 notices, that's something that comes straight from Obamacare. These are the October 1st notices, and they must state at least three things, right? Healthcare.gov and the exchanges exist. You may qualify for a subsidy, and if you have an exchange plan, it's paid for on a post-tax basis, not a pre-tax basis, which may be offered by your employer. Pretty cut and dry. It is a big controversy whether there's a penalty for not issuing these or not. The Department of Labor made a statement in mid-September, so pretty close to the actual deadline for issuing these, saying they weren't going to penalize employers who failed to issue these. Now, that's great, but again, the Department of Labor is not big in the enforcement area right now. And I'm not saying they have no presence. I'm just saying the IRS has a much broader presence in enforcement of this. And this is a multi-departmental statute. Health and Human Services, IRS, DOL, they all issue regulations concerning this law. So it's nice to see the Department of Labor take a back seat. Does that mean another agency may enforce it anyway? Does the law itself say an employer must do this or they shall do this, meaning subject to penalties if you don't? That's what it says. That's what I read anyway. So with my clients, we issue them. At LBMC, you have an alternative or a modified notice on file that you can give your clients. And this will do a few things. If they haven't issued it, penalties don't go into effect until 30 days after the deadline, so there's still time for them to do it, one. And two, if they get it out, they don't have to worry about whether there's going to be a penalty or not. We don't even have to have the discussion. You can step in as a trusted advisor and say, hey, just give this to your employees. Just hand it out. You don't even have to have a record that they received it. You just have to hand it out to them and note it to yourself. Like, they don't have to sign anything saying, I got this, although it's a good policy to do so. But as long as a paper copy makes their hands, you're never going to see an issue with this. It takes 5 minutes. It's a very easy thing, and it can establish credibility between you and the client. So I always think it's a good idea. Summary annual reports, final document. This is usually actually given by insurance companies or TPAs if it's a self-insured plan, and so it's not as big of an issue. We want to make sure that it's in the list of documents that they have for their health plan, though. In my experience, if you ask for a document and they can't find it or find it pretty quick, usually means they don't have it or they need to have it in a better spot. So it's something that we want to be on the lookout for. Procedures, I'm not going to hit as much, but there are things like delivery of document procedures. Some people like to email documents to everybody, but if you have workers who are, say, on the line or don't use a computer as part of their ordinary business activity, and there's no computer, say, in their break room, then emailing the documents may violate these. It sounds ridiculous, but you can't get to 20,000 pages of regulations if you don't have a couple hundred on delivery, right? You have to address everything. So there are procedures that we want to follow. It's usually, again, a lot of ERISA stuff, so I don't want to raise it as big a concern as maybe the documents themselves, which tend to be a frequent problem. So we've covered compliance, but what everybody's really concerned about is the cost issues, right? This is going to cost me more money. That's the big problem that your clients are going to have. And that's what they're really going to rely on you for. Compliance, they say, look, we got people, they handle the compliance, and at least if it goes wrong, I'll just sue them for the money. But when it comes to cost, this is something I'm actually going to have to pay every year. There are three main cost challenges that I identify under Obamacare. You can classify this stuff any which way, but this is how I think it really boils down for most businesses. The first is increased coverage, and I start from most severe to least with this list. Increased coverage is having to cover people you either haven't covered in the past or don't want to cover on your plan. So when we talk about workers who are now considered full-time and must be offered minimum essential coverage, these kinds of phrases, we're talking about increased coverage. I have a list of industries I want to cover towards the end. I think it's my last slide actually, and it's really discussing specific issues you might see in these industries. Almost all of them face increased coverage problems, because if you're covering people where you used to not cover it, it's going to cost you more money. It's very simple. And the more employees you have, the bigger an increased coverage problem you have. Improved coverage comes in two forms. And it has to do for large employers, and we'll get into the definitions. But for large employers, typically you want your employees to stay off of a state exchange, because if they go to an exchange and qualify for a subsidy, that's an excise tax to you. So then the exchange plans are very nice. Now, I don't know whether they're going to be successful, but I do know they're very generous. They have all the essential health benefits, and we'll identify those. They have lower deductibles. They have pretty good networks. It's not as good as the federal government wanted, but it's going to be a lot better than your clients offer. And I'm not saying that to insult your clients. I'm simply saying the federal government's being very, very generous with their plans. And they're doing it on purpose. Again, if they can attract a lot of people to their exchanges, they have a broader risk pool, less chance of adverse selection, so it's better for the federal government to have good enrollment. And if they can get that enrollment while excise taxing employers, it's a double benefit for the government. We always say you can't get a double benefit as a taxpayer. Well, the government can. And so they can really stand to gain from creating these harsher rules against employers, and improved coverage is one of the ways this occurs. If you have to compete with the state exchange to keep employees from migrating to it, you're going to have to offer more benefits. If you're offering more benefits, coverage gets more expensive. For small employers, there's that line, right, that your healthcare coverage isn't going to change. Well, if you're a part of a small business, I hate to tell you, but it is absolutely going to change, and there's no choice to have in the matter in, I'd say, 99% of the cases. The only way you can get out of this is if you self-insure your plan, which a lot of small businesses are maybe not as interested in. So the reason for that is extra regulations on smaller businesses. We'll get into them, but they have to offer improved coverage. It's simply going to be the case. Finally, inflexible coverage. Depending on your size, again, there are certain inflexibilities you have to keep with your plan. If you have more than 200 employees, you have to automatically enroll them in a coverage of some sort if they're eligible for it. If you have new employees, there's a 90-day waiting period, which some businesses had longer before that you can delay before offering them coverage. So there's a number of situations that we have to pay attention to with inflexible coverage that drive up costs, but only in incremental values. So it's not as big of a problem. They're more just compliance issues that happen to be cost issues as well. So very quickly, I'm going to run through some current regulations. Well, quickly for most of them. I want to talk about W-2s because if I'm in front of a lot of accountants, then I feel like it's my duty to talk tax forms. But these are either already in effect or becoming effective this year. Limited rescission on coverage, I'll cover in the next slide. So W-2s, and this is very rare that I get to talk about these, but you might know Box 12, Code DD on the W-2s changing, or has changed, I need to say, to reflect different types of benefits that people are receiving and being listed on the W-2s. So there's mandatory and optional things that must be covered in there, and I'll run through the list really quick. Major medical plans, flexible spending accounts, pre-tax hospital indemnity, but not other sorts of indemnity or voluntary benefits, employee assistance plans, on-site medical and wellness programs, those three. You must report if there's a COBRA premium required by the employer. If not, then it's optional. And domestic partners who are included in gross income. So those are new reporting requirements on W-2s. You guys probably already know this, and that's fine. I just want to make sure we're comprehensive. Optional reporting requirements also include dental and vision coverage and other kind of voluntary benefits, catastrophic plans, cancer plans, things like that, that aren't technically health plans according to the Public Health Services Act, but do offer health type benefits, I should say. HRA contributions, and I do want to note on this one, never put these down. It's optional. If you don't have to, don't do it. With HRAs, there are very specific health non-discrimination rules, and you can find them in 105 11 of the federal regulations, Treasury regulations, I mean, there's no reason to report a compliance issue with HRA discrimination. And it can occur very easily. Just in the past week, I want to say 2 or 3 different people have come up to me and said, these HRAs may be a great solution for healthcare reform. All we have to do is offer them to management and above. And it's like we're giving them money and we're not giving anybody else money, so we save on having to provide it to everyone. The issue is that's flagrant violation. And it provides what's called an excess reimbursement to highly compensated individuals under 105H of the code. Excess reimbursements are a big issue. We'll talk about them more. I have a whole non-discrimination slide, but we want to avoid them when we can. And then finally, multi-employer plans are optional for reporting, and self-funded plans not subject to COBRA or federal COBRA is optional as well. So medical loss ratios, if you've received a check from an insurance company or your clients have, it's because the insurance company didn't spend enough money on medical coverage. And if they don't meet that ratio of spending on medical coverage versus profit from other areas, they have to reimburse the clients. These checks go out pretty frequently because insurance companies want to maximize profits. So of course they'd rather maximize it now and reimburse later, especially because they can probably keep the interest in the meantime, than try and fall under it. Summary of benefits we already discussed. Women's preventive care is being expanded, and wellness programs in general are changing a lot next year. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's Public Health Services Act 2716, I believe. Medicare Part D is being expanded. It's the donut hole of prescription drug coverage for seniors. It's a gap that's being closed in. Flexible spending accounts are limited to $2,500 a year. This has really harmed Cadillac and executive health plans because it used to be a great way to put a lot of pre-tax dollars into medical benefits. Now it's limited to $2,500. Non-discrimination rules, as I said, we'll talk about those a lot. There's about 3 or 4 different kinds of health non-discrimination that are cropping up either because of Obamacare or being newly regulated. We want to pay attention to all of them. Some of them not so bad, some of them are horrendous and current for next year, I'll add, so we want to be very careful in that field. And then elimination of annual and lifetime limits on coverage. I'm going to use that as a springboard into insurance regulations because we're talking about cost increases to your clients, and we can't get into that. And maybe Blue Cross is you advise Blue Cross. That'd be great. But even if you don't have an insurance company as your client, if their costs go up, then premium costs go up. And this is not just for your clients, but this is for LBMC itself. It's useful to know, I think, why insurance costs are going to go up. And when they talk about, oh, this is going to save a lot of money, I'll give you $50 if you can find an actuary on the planet who says, yeah, costs are going to go down in spite of this stuff. So the first is no annual or lifetime limitation on coverage. That means that what used to be a $1 million cap on annual coverage became $2 million and is now becoming unlimited. So from an underwriting perspective, there used to be a maximum liability or maximum loss on any specific claim that you could underwrite for, or even an aggregate of claims over the course of a year or a lifetime. That allowed underwriters to say, well, if we don't have exposure above this, we don't have to account for that risk, our price will go down as a result. When it doubles, your risk, even though $2 million is way up here and your average participant may only see about $3,000 of benefits per year, you still have to account for triplets, right, or something that will be a major issue. And not to say triplets are bad, right? That's congratulations, we're all very happy for you, right? But it costs a lot of money. I'm a twin, so when my dad found out we were having twins, the story goes, here's baby A and here's baby B. The first thing he said was, does that double the cost? And the second thing that happened was my mom slapped him. So it's a cost issue. But what we've seen on the practical side, so from an underwriting perspective, we already know costs are going to go up because of this regulation. But it's even worse than we thought because hospitals, Lord love them, they set their own prices. And they set prices really at an interesting pace and almost on an arbitrary basis, you could say. Because of that, and I don't mean to accuse them of setting arbitrary prices, but that's how it can look sometimes. What we've seen on the insurance side, and I've heard numerous people who work at insurance companies complain to me about justifiably so, is that what used to be $1 million triplets, because that's what the total cost would be, when the cap was raised to $2 million, same procedures, they became $2 million triplets. And when the costs are going away, they're now seeing claims for $3 to $5 million for the exact same surgical procedures, the exact same care. So what's going on is hospitals are taking advantage of the fact that these limits are going away. So this isn't just to an underwriter anymore. Yeah, our exposure is higher, but the chances of that is so rare. They're saying, well, the chances of a $1 million claim we now have to assume is the same chance as a $5 million claim, because that's the kind of claims we're receiving. So it's a very big issue. Limited rescission of coverage. It's harder to kick people off of plans. They have to actually be committing fraud that the insurance company can prove to kick them off of health plans now. And if it's harder to kick people off a plan, costs are going to go up. It's more of an incremental thing, but we do want to note it. Dependent coverage. This is covering children up to age 26 and in the future spousal coverage. So if you saw in the news recently, I believe it was UPS that said they're going to drop spousal coverage. That saves them a lot of money. I think that makes sense, right? The less people you cover, the more money you save. But FedEx, the very next day, issued a statement saying, well, you know what, we're keeping spousal coverage. And that did two things, right? One, it was really great PR. And two, it helps attract, retain, and motivate their own employees. Are they paying more money? Yes. Who's going to win out in that economic battle? I don't know. And this is what we have to respond to with clients. We have to identify, are they a UPS or are they a FedEx? Are they willing to put maybe a little more money into this program to have a better business and increase maybe intangible economic factors for their business? Or do they want the tangible economic factors to control the pure money game? It's really a question for them. We need to be able to respond to both. Guarantee issue and guarantee renewability. This means that if you're an insurance company and you do business in a given state, if somebody wants to do business with you, you have to do business with them. You can't say no because we don't like your employee population, or no, as an individual you have a lot of pre-existing conditions. You have to offer them something. And you have to renew it the next year when they want it, unless the law changes and means, or you stop selling the product altogether in the state. So guarantee issue really looks bad for insurance companies. And in fact, historically, we've seen in states like Washington that have had guarantee issue for a number of years, these rules alone were responsible for about a 20 to 30 increase in premiums in that state over a period of 3 to 5 years. That is a significant cost increase for your clients, because the insurance companies, they're not in this for charity, right? Yes, I'm cynical when it comes to some of their marketing tactics and the things that they're doing, but from a mathematical standpoint, I understand where they're coming from. They're saying it's more expensive to do business. I have to raise my costs to my clients. I have to pass that on. I can't just absorb it all or I'll go out of business. I totally identify with that.
I have a question on that. Is that
Sure.
True? Is a guaranteed issue applied to individual policies not issued through an exchange, like where you apply for an individual policy, Blue Cross Blue Shield?
Yes.
Okay, if you apply for, let's say that you're young, nothing wrong with you, and you say, I don't need the insurance, you don't apply on the exchange, you don't have an individual policy, and then you get cancer during the year, can you apply during the year, or do you have to apply
Great question.
the first of the year?
So the question is, first, does guarantee issue and renewability apply to individual policies outside of an exchange? And they do. Second question is, if an individual doesn't have any coverage and then they become very sick, does that mean that an insurance company will be forced to issue them a policy even if they say have cancer? The answer is yes, but your rate is going to be incredibly high because they can reflect their prices based off a medical questionnaire or something like that. Now, there.
On the exchanges?
Yes, and the exchanges, absolutely. The exchanges want to soak up as many people no matter what. In the individual market, there's a lot of worry with insurance companies about that. And that's the reason you see rate increases, especially in these smaller businesses and on the individual market, much more volatile. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but there's a Kaiser Health study that backs that up, that was influential with this bill. That's part of the problem, right? If people have the ability to get on. Now, with the exchange, it's a little different, but with the individual market, if they can get a policy whenever, they could be sick when they get the policy, and insurance companies need to underwrite for that probability. Now, with an exchange, it has an open enrollment period. This year, I believe it is October 1 to the end of March. Next year, it's going to be October 1 through, I believe, December 7th or so. And in future years, it's going to be the 15th of October through around early to mid-December. So you can't, if you get sick, simply get on an exchange unless it's during that open enrollment period. So it's not going to be as easy to game the system as it was, say, in Massachusetts with their healthcare reform, but it will still be a limited possibility. As far as the other end of that, we often hear, when I get sick, I'll get on, when I'm healthy, I'll get off. Getting off an exchange under the law is pretty easy. You can usually do it within a month. But so far, procedurally, it hasn't had to happen yet because benefits haven't been issued. But procedurally, there's been a lot of concerns that have been raised lately. I don't know whether they're founded or not in anything, but getting people off may be a bit of a problem of actually recognizing that they don't want to be on the exchange anymore, they're not paying for it, things like that.
For the other side of that is going from a different type of plan on the exchange. If you get sick, going from what's the bottom of it? Is it
Sure.
Like going from a silver to a gold or platinum increase?
So if you want to change from, say, a bronze to silver coverage mid-year, you have to do it during open enrollment. So it's restricted by the same time period, but it will be a possibility. If you say have a bronze plan and you get really sick and you want to get a gold plan, I don't see a lot of movement in that because a lot of the benefits offered, in fact, all of the benefits are going to be the same. It really is the cost sharing differences, but each exchange plan has a maximum out-of-pocket rule for individuals, and a lot of exchanges set theirs at $5,000. Past $5,000, the individual's not going to be contributing anything else to their health care anyway. So for them, changing metal levels isn't going to be as big of an issue because if they know they're going to pay $5,000, they may as well stick with the policy they have. They'll get the same amount of coverage. By the way, maximum out-of-pocket rules are another huge cost increase that I didn't list here for insurance companies. But past that maximum out-of-pocket, or I call it MOOP because MOOP is a really fun word, to be quite honest, the insurance company's covering the rest of that. And that means that it's going to reflect on future health premiums for the employer, and the underwriting risk is tremendous. A lot of people who are coming in and presenting increased coverage problems, they don't have a risk history. They've never had insurance before. How does an insurance company price those people? According to the insurance company, they have to do it risky, right? You don't want to just assume they're all healthy, nice people. You have to assume they're astronauts who are chain smokers because you just don't know what their utilization of benefits is going to be when they've never had benefits before. So moving on to pre-existing condition prohibitions. I think everybody's pretty familiar with this one. There's not a whole lot to cover. We hate pre-existing conditions. It's one of the reasons we hate insurance companies, right? Because, all I had was one pill for heartburn one time, or all I did was take a Tums, and now they won't cover my heartburn 5 years later or something like that. And there's obviously much, much worse cases, but it can crop up even for what you would assume to be a regular, healthy individual. So taking those away obviously increases the risk because this is guaranteed utilization for an insurance company. They know they're going to have to pay for it, and they don't want to. And then finally, rating rules. So no more gender discrimination, whether that's a fair term or not. Men and women do utilize healthcare differently, and there are different ways to price that, but you can no longer factor that into your rating and premiums. That usually means you're going to go with whoever costs more and assume everybody's a woman. No offense, but women tend to utilize more. So all of these are going to increase prices. If not next year, then the year after. If not that year, then the year after. Healthcare costs go up by about 6.2 to 8.6% per year, just regularly because of the way we structure healthcare in this country. It's going to go up by probably a greater tick for the next few years. United Healthcare issued back in the summer, expect a 20% increase across the board for all of our clients, even if you've got good claims history, because we're dealing with this right now. So that's the kind of behind-the-scenes costs. Let's look at the direct costs to employers. And we're going to discuss 3 excise taxes. 2 of them are the employer mandates, and 1 is a really scary one that nobody ever talks about. So I'm going to be happy to share that with you. So the employer mandates affect employers differently depending on their classifications. And I pluralize that because there are 2 classifications. One of them we hear about a lot, one of them we don't. And it's really unfortunate, even from insurance representatives or brokers, you never hear about the second classification. And I'll get into a little bit of why I think that is, but usually it's, as you might guess, or maybe just from my attitude, so people can make more money, right, when they make these sales. But first we'll start with the applicable large employer or small employer classification. And I think for every one of your clients, it will be useful for you to at least do this in your head. You can also do this for money. It's called a pay or play analysis. This would be a great service LBMC could offer. Hey, do you know if you're an applicable large employer or not? We can help you. So it's a really good service you can offer your clients to give them clarity on how Obamacare will affect their business. An applicable large employer is any employer with 50 or more full-time equivalents. So 50 or more full-time equivalents, what does that mean? You take the number of full-time employees, you add in part-time and seasonal workers into a formula. Typically, you add up their hours over a period of 120 days, you divide by 120, and you get an equivalency. So if you got 2 workers who put in 15 hours of work a week on average, and 1 worker who puts in 30 hours a week on average, which is a full-time employee, right? Then you're going to have an equivalency of 2. Out of 3 workers, 2 of equivalency. Now, you'll notice my citations are discussing 4980 Cap H a lot. That's where we find the employer mandates and the excise penalties for them. A really important code section. If you want to take a look at it, I highly recommend it. It's not too long as far as code sections go, and it will explain a lot of just what the mechanics of the employer mandates are to you. So yesterday, and this is how recent you can find misinformation. I try to keep up with a lot of talk radio and news stations whenever I'm driving, just because you get the latest updates, and this is all I live for, right, is updates on Obamacare. So I've been following this. There was a story on a talk station yesterday, and it can illustrate just how off the mark people can get, and how even well-meaning interpretations of the law can be dramatic confusions. They were discussing a business, I believe it was based in Georgia, and they had huge Obamacare problems. The inaccuracies in this story were numerous, so I'm only going to talk about one, but it's just, you kind of get that cringing feeling, like, I want to call in and tell these people they don't know what they're talking about, but anyway. They had about 17 employees who were considered full-time, and they had about 400 employees who they considered part-time. So by that math, you can easily see it's an applicable large employer, just without even doing the calculation. Now, what they went on to say is because they were full-time equivalents, they have to offer health care to all their full-time equivalents. And that's not the case. You must offer, and this is 49A Cap H A, A1 and 2, you have to offer coverage to your full-time employees. The full-time equivalency goes into that calculation of whether you are subject to these penalties or not, but it does not dictate who you have to offer coverage to. It's a different portion, and it's, in fact, same law, different subsection, 49A Cap H C2A. So it's just mixing up 2 subsections, but if you do that, you go from having to offer coverage to 17 people to 417 people. A huge difference in perspective and cost. And furthermore, in 4980 Cap H, and I didn't cite this one, but it's in there, I promise, go read it, there's an overcounting provision. You subtract the first 30 full-time employees from your calculation of the penalty. $60,000 in excise taxes you can save just from this overcounting provision. So for this business, they only have 17 full-time employees. Subtract 30 from that, or $60,000 from their potential excise taxes if they opted out. They have no A-tax or opt-out penalty liability under Obamacare. They have no problem at all. And they're making the news because they're worried they have a 400-plus person problem. So you get this overblown story that is misstating what is actually occurring with this business, and nobody's doing it intentionally, but they mixed up their subsections, or at least in my opinion. Now, did they actually read the sections? Probably not. They're just mixing up what they think the law says. There's plenty wrong with this law. If you're listening to statements of why it's so bad, you can find plenty to complain about. I'm not going to lie. But there's no sense in overblowing or being misleading, even intentionally or unintentionally, because that doesn't help. That makes me get phone calls from my clients saying, I thought you said I didn't have to cover my part-time workers. And I say, you don't, it's okay. And we have to have a discussion about that. But those discussions should be unnecessary, right? And hopefully you'll have those discussions because that means people are calling you and you're their trusted Obamacare advisor. But be on the lookout for those types of situations. Now, with applicable large employers, you have to provide what's called minimum essential coverage to 95% of your employees or more, or you pay what's called the A tax, or the opt-out penalty. That's really the price you pay for being an applicable large employer. If you want a definition of minimum essential coverage, good luck. After page and page of regulations and laws, you will not find a clear one, in my opinion. You can look in 4980 Cap HA, but that just discusses the penalties for not having minimum essential coverage. It also directs you to 5000 Cap A F2, which is the individual mandate penalty, where it discusses minimum essential coverage. If you're looking for something precise, you're not going to find it. But it's the standard we're all held to, so let's really hope we meet it, right?
A question related to that.
Sure.
You know, I find that unbelievable that they didn't address minimum essential coverage purpose. And,
So do I.
you know, you know, we have clients I know that are, and I'm not sure exactly how it works, these skinny plans. Having skinny plans, you're going to cover that?
Absolutely, I'll be covering skinny plans. I have a lot to say about them, so that's great. And I'm really glad you brought that up. So the question is something I'm going to address in a minute about skinny plans and further defining minimum essential coverage. What I will say is I'm an attorney. I love gray areas, and so this is a big gray area. So there's a lot of room for me to play around in it and still remain compliant. But there are other restrictions that kind of rain on my party, I guess I could say. So if you're large, you have excise penalty worries. That's what we want to note right now. If you're small, no excise penalty worries, but that your coverages will not change. Your coverage will change, and this is why. So insurance companies offer products, what they say, on the fully insured markets. If they're offering to the small group market, and all small employers in this classification purchase on the small group market, that means that the insurance companies must offer in line with Obamacare regulations, which state anything offered on the small group market must have all essential health benefits. You'll find essential health benefits under 1302B of Obamacare, and I'll just read them off very quickly, but you can see it's a pretty big list. Ambulatory patient services, emergency care, hospitalization, maternity and newborn care, mental health and substance abuse care, prescription drugs, rehabilitative services, laboratory services, preventive and wellness, which includes all that the women's preventive care that's being expanded, a very big topic, and pediatric dental and vision. Now, normally dental and vision is not considered a health benefit. It's an accepted benefit plan under Public Health Services Act. Very important that it remains so. If you have clients that combine that into their major medical plan or their regular health plan, tell them to stop. Most people don't, but it's still an issue you see every once in a while. It means that what would be a plan that's not subject to Obamacare regulations is now subject to it. You can imagine how the costs go up. So we don't want that to happen. Now, most plans do not offer all these essential health benefits now. In fact, I would wager almost none of them do. They usually offer maybe 8 of the 10 or something like that. That means improved coverage. If you have to offer more benefits next year, it's going to cost more. And if an employer says, well, I'm just not going to buy a plan with all those benefits, good luck. One, insurance companies love to sell essential health benefits plans because the more benefits they sell, the more money they make, and the better their minimum loss ratio rules are. Two, they're not permitted to sell you anything less if you're on the small group market. So you're just simply not going to be able to access other products. Now let's get into our second classification. These are what market you purchase health coverage on, and I've already touched on it a little bit. So we've got applicable large and small employers on one hand. On the other hand, we also have to classify our clients. Are they small group, large group, or self-insured? If they're individual, that just means head of household and family at the most. So it's not really up for discussion when we're just talking about businesses. Although I will note that a lot of self-employed employers are considered either individual or small group in different parts of the law, simply to say they can't be an individual who self-insures their coverage, right? That would be a great circumvention to the individual mandate, but we don't have to get into those details. This is a much easier thing to classify because you look at number of employees. You don't think about part-time or full-time, just how many people are showing up to work at this place. If it's 2 to 100, they're small group. If it's larger than that, they're large group. And if you notice by the citations, self-insured is not contained as a definition in Obamacare. It's defined elsewhere in the Public Health Service Act, and it's defined by your funding. Now, another wild story, as wild as Obamacare gets, had a broker this week tell me self-insured plans are illegal under Obamacare. You cannot have them anymore. And he was saying this to his client. Now, I don't even know where this comes from, right? There's obviously nothing like that in Obamacare, but quite the contrary. There's so many things discussing how self-insured plans are much more flexibly treated compared to other types of plans. So, I would give you just as an example, IRS Notice 2012-58, which discusses how self-insured plans are more flexible. I believe it's 58 or 53, but it just goes to prove the point that if you have the ability to show those things to a client and you have someone who's maybe product-driven or offering product-driven advice on the other side, you can very quickly become a trusted advisor by pointing out their mistakes, and there's plenty of mistakes. All right, I don't know where they get some of this stuff from. And you can show the client, I actually know what I'm talking about. I am here to assist you, and I can assist you competently. It's a great exercise. So being on the lookout for that kind of stuff is going to be very key, I think, moving forward. Now, if we draw a line between large group and small group, we have 2 plans on top and 2 on bottom. The 2 on bottom are much more heavily regulated. Small group and individual market plans. They have to offer all essential health benefits, maximum deductibles of $2,000 for individual, $4,000 per family. And $2,000 sounds like a lot, but when the maximum deductible you can have is $6,350 for individuals, $12,700 for a family, you can see how a business may say, I wish I could save money with a high deductible plan that was at the maximum. And if they're missing out on $4,000 of deductible raising, that's $4,000 of incremental savings they get per dollar of deductible they raise. That's a lot of money that they miss out on if they're in this group. Now, why does that happen? Well, a Kaiser 2010 health study would say because these markets are much more volatile and they have a much worse participant claims experience. And that's what the government would maybe cite if they were giving their position. What's my cynical in following our theme position? Well, if the government's trying to shift costs and trying to protect their state exchanges, then what they're going to do is over-regulate their competition. So who are the state exchanges available to? The individual and the small group markets. Not available to the large group market, and competing with self-insured plans is a whole separate issue. So because of that, they get to control the alternatives, right? The alternatives being employer-sponsored plans. And they get to say, you can't offer something that's going to undercut the exchanges and potentially put them in danger of adverse selection. Say something that would benefit healthy people on the employer plan and put all the unhealthy people on the exchange plan because they don't necessarily benefit by the plan. Those types of arrangements, which you could argue a high deductible plan is that type of an arrangement, would really harm a state exchange because all the unhealthy people go to the exchange, they see adverse selection, and we either pump tax dollars into the exchange to keep it afloat, or even worse for the administration, it fails. And if it fails, signature legislation, think of Obama's legacy, they can't allow that to happen, which is why you see these types of rules. So I hope we've identified what I call the dangerous discrepancy. And this is what I was referring to in the beginning. You can have a large employer who's also a small employer. And this defies common sense. This is, I think, the most flagrant logical violation of Obamacare. Because how do you have something that's large and small? It doesn't make common sense, but if you think of the theme, right, they want as many people to be as applicable large as possible because that subjects them to excise taxes. But they want as many of them to be subject to the extra regulations as possible, which means they raise the amount of employees it takes to be a large group market purchaser. So what happens if you fall in this range? You are in a lot of trouble. On a per employee per year basis, you'll be paying more for your health coverage than anybody else. I call this the middle class of businesses because they get it the worst. So you have the excise tax liability. Just like an applicable large employer, you also have the essential health benefits and the deductible rules just like a small employer. You get the worst of both worlds. Now, will larger businesses pay more in total? Yes, per year, almost certainly. But will employers in this range pay more on a relative scale? Absolutely. If you have clients in this range, they're the ones you might want to talk to first because clients in this range are less likely to have proper counsel. They may just be dealing with an insurance company only. And again, not to knock insurance companies, but they offer product-driven advice and education. And that usually means they will say to everybody, you need this essential health benefits plan, you can't have a MOOP higher than $5,000, and all of these other types of rules, which is not the case, but they'll say it's the case because it increases their sales and it increases good sales, right? If I could sell you a $10 product instead of a $5 product, absolutely go for the $10 one. My margins will look better. So it's a very dangerous place to be. Now, are there ways out of it? Yes. If you go from a small group market purchaser to a self-funded purchaser or a self-insured market, then you're not subject to these regulations. You have a lot of flexibility. Can all small businesses self-insure? Absolutely not. But there's increasing attention to self-insured plans as a result. So it's something we should keep in mind. So let's talk about the penalties themselves. And this is 4980 Cap H A1. I call it the A tax. It's otherwise known as the opt-out penalty, the pay-or-play penalty, lots of different names. And what it says is if you have an applicable large employer status and you fail to offer minimum essential coverage to at least 95% of your employees who are full-time, which is just to prevent errors, basically, then if you don't do that, you'll be subject to the opt-out penalty. Which is $2,000 per full-time employee. Doesn't matter if you're offering them coverage or not. If you don't hit the 95% mark, you pay for every full-time employee $2,000 in excise taxes per year. It's calculated on a monthly basis, so you could be out of compliance for 9 of the 12 months of the year, or 6 of the 12 months. It really just depends. And the reporting requirements are under 6056B of the code. Now, the reason that the employer mandates exist as a delay, let me rephrase that. The reason that they were delayed is not because these penalties themselves were delayed. Quite the contrary. If you look at 2013-45, you'll see that the reporting requirements were delayed. This provision, 6056B, was delayed, not 4980 Cap HA. The penalties are still in effect next year, but no employer is obligated to report them. Is anybody going to report them as a result? No. And that's the federal government's conclusion. Why would you tell the government you're not in compliance? Well, you wouldn't unless you unwittingly do it, right? Like with the appeals audits we discussed earlier. But in this case, it's direct. Nobody's going to report it, and so nobody will have a penalty worry. This is good for employers in one sense, but it's bad in a number of others. First, a number of my clients had exemptions until the renewability date, which was the old transitional relief. Guess what the renewability date was for their insurance contract? It was December 30th. They would have gotten a year off anyway. So this didn't really mean a lot to them. This only affects other employers, who maybe didn't qualify for that. It also replaces that transitional relief. So if you've heard in the past, you only have to comply on your renewal date. That was old transitional relief that's no longer in effect, 2013-45. Its title is New Transitional Relief. So it's pretty clear in that that's not going to apply anymore. The old stuff only is in reference to 2014. It didn't reference 2015. It's not going to be applicable. So we need to keep that in mind with, moving forward. If you don't have a plan that's going to be compliant on January 1, 2015, you're going to incur penalties. If you're out of compliance for one day of the month, you have the month penalty. So as an example, let's say you have 80 employees. Prevent overcounting. It's lessened to 50. $2,000, it works out to about $8,300 in excise taxes per month. It's a lot of money. We don't want to pay it. There's also non-discrimination issues that we'll get to in a minute. Now, what a lot of businesses are going to say is, okay, well, I've done my due diligence here, and I've looked into the average cost of insuring a single individual in Tennessee, and it's about $6,000. Now, if I'm looking at $8,300 for all of my employees in penalties per month, clearly there's some savings there, and to an extent they're true. But we have to remember a few things. One, it's an ordinary necessary business expense, so you can deduct a health plan costs. And two, excise taxes. You can't deduct those. So what happens when you have an excise tax and lost deductions from having a health plan? You get this calculation. So your worst case scenario is you're going to save about $1,600 per employee per year in the state of Tennessee. Best case scenario is it may cost more than $6,000, so there's more savings, or for family coverage, you would definitely be paying more. So there's significant opportunity for savings dealing with the opt-out penalty. And a lot of employees, as a result, will say, I'll just pay the penalty and move on, simplify this whole thing. You hear it all the time. You hear it all the time on talk radio, too. Every employer is going to opt out because it's always going to be cheaper. Now, there are other implications that are non-economic, right, or intangible, and that's the attraction, retention, motivation of employees. You want to make sure you're not just totally ticking everyone off, or you're going to see incredible turnover, things like that. Non-discrimination rules, which again we'll cover. But you will see a lot of employers that just want to play the dollar game. If that is the case, I would let you know that for the average plan, this works because $6,000 per employee per year is the average cost in Tennessee. For a more sophisticated plan, we can drive those costs down. We can drive those costs down below $2,000 per employee per year before we take any deductions into account. We can have significant savings here. So if you just want to play the dollar game and opt out, I am here to say right now we can design a better plan than that. And we can look very smart for doing so. As a trusted advisor, say, you know, there's a better thing out there. We're accountants. We hate excise taxes. We always want to find a solution for an excise tax problem if we can. And we can show you how to do that right here. So this is something that I think could be very powerful that we can give to our clients here. Second, the B tax, and I call it the B tax because I really hate saying non-qualified or unaffordable coverage penalty over and over again. This penalty has to do with the exchanges, and this is 4980 Cap H A2. If you have an employee who is being offered minimum essential coverage, but instead they reject it and they go to the state exchange and qualify for government aid, any subsidy at all, then the employer is taxed $3,000. Again, it's calculated on a monthly basis, but the total is $3,000 per employee per year to a ceiling of the opt-out penalty. So if 2/3 of your employees get subsidies, you're going to be paying the opt-out penalty and offering a health plan. This is the worst of the worst. Why would you do both, right? You absolutely want to avoid this problem. What this says to me is if we're going to offer a health plan, we need to do it in a way that's not going to incur these B tax penalties. And this is where, my party gets rained on. I love having minimum essential coverage as a standard that's super vague because that means I can be very flexible in my plan designs and come up with things that are really low cost. Skinny plans, for instance. If you do that, though, and you just have a skinny plan, you are really rolling the dice and trying to hope that people don't go to an exchange and qualify for a subsidy. Because if they do, the cost of your benefits program as a whole goes up by $3,000 each time somebody goes to an exchange. Because I can tell you right now, there's no skinny plan that exists that prevents the B tax. That's not their nature. They're supposed to be bare bones. They don't meet qualified and affordable status. Now, that Wall Street Journal article that coined that term came out May 19th. And it was a really big, I think, shift in the way a lot of people were thinking about health plans. That's not when the concept was invented. Obviously, it was actually somewhat, popular in benefit circles. I don't want to be like a skinny plan hipster, but it was something that we discussed, right? And the issue was always, are you going to just roll the dice on your employees going to the exchanges? That seems really risky. And some employers were willing to do so. Okay. But, and I want to make sure we really drive home this fact, skinny plans are dead. They are completely dead. And the reason they are is 2013-45. The employer mandates have been delayed. So what happens when an employer doesn't offer a plan in 2014, like none of them want to right now? A lot of them don't want to. The employees are all going to go to the state exchange. They're all going to qualify for government aid on the state exchange, just like they would have. But this is the only place they have to go now to avoid their individual mandate penalties or to get coverage because they actually want it. So when you create a plan in 2015 and it's only a skinny plan, you will not be able to pull those subsidies from those employees for 2015. The plan itself will do nothing. So you'll be paying for that plan, and not only will you not be rolling the dice on whether you're going to be excise taxed or not, you'll know exactly how much excise taxes you'll be paying because none of those employees are going to go back to a skinny plan when they have this really generous state exchange plan. Now, the only way this wouldn't work is if state exchanges were such a disaster that nobody wanted to be on them no matter what. The odds of that happening are possible but improbable, especially in the first year. A skinny plan strategy by itself, I understand, but it needs to be more sophisticated. And it can be. There are solutions to these issues, but if you just have that idea by itself, your clients are going to be in a lot of trouble. So I don't recommend that moving forward.
Let me ask you a question. On minimum essential coverage, before an employee, I thought that before an employee could qualify on the exchange, for insurance on the exchange, that they had to indicate that coverage was not available to them, that was minimum essential coverage by the employer. So if the employer tells the employee, if I notice that you're covered under a plan that offers minimum essential coverage, how can the employee get insurance on the
You're my favorite audience member because you're just leading me right into my next slide. No, it's perfect. It's a perfect question. So he's saying, you know, how do we see this B tax penalty when you're actually offering minimum essential coverage? And it is a great question. I'm going to cover very quickly because this really doesn't warrant much time, and you have the chart in front of you. Please take a look at it. This is the income test. You have to have income within this range, 100 to 400% of the poverty level. Depends on how many dependents you have. As you can see, you can make $108,000 a year and still qualify for aid if you have a spouse and 3 kids. So I like to run through this pretty quickly because it's simply not the case that you're going to have employees who don't qualify for this. In fact, most or all of them will. And you're not going to be able, as an employer, to go up to them and say, hey, you think about having kids because that might be some excise liability that I don't want. So I really don't suggest that strategy. We have to assume in most cases, unless it's a smaller business, which doesn't have to worry about this anyway, most employees are going to qualify for aid on the income side. So how do you prevent it? You have to establish what's called qualified and affordable coverage, right? This is the non-qualified and unaffordable coverage penalty. So your offer of minimum essential coverage by itself is insufficient unless it also meets the qualification test and the affordability test. This is Code Section 36 Cap B C2C Romanet 1 and 2. So you can dive right in there, and that's a really long code section. So I would take that one in breaks. It has a lot of charts and things like that. So minimum essential coverage or skinny plans alone aren't enough, and that's the reason why they don't protect against this. Well, I offer them coverage. How are they still getting all these subsidies? So to have a qualified coverage, you have to have at least 60% what they call actuarial value, or if you're a large group market or self-insured employer, it's actually called minimum value, but nobody ever calls it that for whatever reason. The issue with this percentage is that it sounds really simple in the definition in Obamacare. It just says the total allowed cost of benefits. And if you're asking yourself, what does that mean? We have to cover 60% of the health benefits on the plan. I wish that would be easy, right? But instead, this is very specifically actuarially defined. Actuarial value is defined as on a per state basis. They take the average fully insured plan in the state and they weight it against other types of plans and establish a percentage. And if you're thinking, wow, this must be a spreadsheet with about 8 different tabs of numbers, you're absolutely right. I mean, it has everything in it, and it's very, very dense. So I don't want to get in too much to the mathematics. Minimum value, instead of on a state-by-state basis, because it's regulated differently and they're not available for state exchanges, or these businesses who are in the large group market, self-insured market, don't have to compete with the exchanges, I should say. They're weighted nationally, the average national large group / self-insured market plan, and those tables are even bigger, and calculating it is even slower. If you want to learn more, Health and Human Services Actuarial Value or Minimum Value Calculator, I can send you a copy if you want. The explanation of the calculator is quite informative, but I can tell you right now it's real boring. I know we work with numbers all the time, but usually we try to stay on the accounting side, not the actuarial, because that's just, you get lost down there. So that's what defines qualified plans. Skinny plans, because I do these tests myself for different designs to come up with, hit between 12 and 25%. So they're automatically unqualified, and they're not going to be able to pass this test. And that's important because the average major medical plan is going to easily pass these tests, 95 to 98%. What I think we should take away from that is, as the percentage of minimum or actuarial value gets lower, the savings for the employer get higher. So an employer has an incentive to get a plan as close to 60% as possible if they're looking to save here. I think that makes good sense. Of course, the plans that are usually sold are going to be in the 80 or above percentile. So you can see how product-driven advice has a mathematical cost increase just from an actuarial perspective. Affordable coverage. This is where a lot of businesses get hurt if they have lower wage employees, because to maintain affordable coverage, you cannot charge more than 9.5% of an employee's what they call monthly adjusted gross income, or MAGI, for premium or prospective coverage each month. At least it's not retrospective, right? That would be very difficult to calculate and very onerous for the employer, but it's prospective. Now, you cannot ask your employees, hey, does your spouse work? And how much do they really contribute towards the household each month? Or do you have a child that has a paper route, you know? Do you use that for the electric bill? You can't get into those questions. Instead, 2011-73 says you look at their W-2, you extrapolate from there what their MAGI is. This is really difficult. I'm going to use California and New York as examples because they just raised their minimum wage to $10 each. And it's a lot simpler to deal with 10 than the numbers that might be below that for minimum wage. But let's say we've got a worker at $10 an hour. They work 30 hours per week. This is the least amount of work they could put in to be classified as a full-time employee. So they're making about $14,000 and change a year before tax. And the maximum premium you can offer them is $114. That's the most you can charge them. Now, if you've got a plan that's costing upwards of $6,000 per year, and they can only contribute $114 a month to it, there's a significant gap there that the employer's covering. So I want to make everybody aware that's the numbers we're dealing with. That's where it can be really dangerous and a huge cost increase to offer coverage to a large number of low-wage workers. Now, this is something that nobody talks about, and it drives me nuts because the A penalty and the B penalty are bad, but they can be violated in ways that you might not expect. A lot of employers, when they learn about affordability, they say, okay, I understand that. Well, at least what I'll do then is say employees are going to contribute 9.5% of their monthly adjusted gross income towards the health plan. That is an automatic violation of a type of health non-discrimination. And to find it, you got to go all the way to the back of the tax code, 9802B. Employees who are similarly situated cannot be charged different amounts of money for their health plan. So if you have an employee who's been there for a few years and makes $11.50 compared to the employee who makes $10 a month, they're paying different amounts of premiums, literally only $1 or $2 per month difference. The penalty is $100 per affected employee per day. And you find that in 4980 Cap DB. This is the penalty that nobody talks about, and I'm going to reference it a few times because $100 per person per day adds up so quickly. It multiplies because if you have, let's say, a class of workers who are similarly situated, let's say they're all the line workers in a factory. They're working full-time because we need them there, otherwise operations shut down. So this is not a situation of, oh, we'll just cut everybody's hours, and we'll talk about that strategy anyway. What we see then is the guy who was just hired, who makes the least, compared to the 40 other people who have already worked there and make something above him. Those workers are going to be paying more than the one new hire will for their health plan. And so the penalty is those 40 workers paying more, even $1 more, it doesn't matter, for their health plan times $100 per day. It's a horrible policy because it will have dramatic impact on a business. But nobody talks about this. Nobody. I mean, it startles me how little attention this gets. Please keep this in mind. And if you hear your employer's clients say, I'm just going to charge 9.5% because I read about the 9.5% rule, let them know that they have to strike it. All right, take a look at their employee handbooks and say which workers are similarly situated and which aren't. If you're looking for a definition of similarly situated, I hate to say it, you're not going to find it. I hope they regulate it one day because it's incredibly confusing to me what that really means. The best we can come up with right now in the industry is to say, look at the handbook, what are their duties, what is their title, things like that, and let's try and differentiate. I've got a client who is creating about 7 different tiers of employment because they're trying to be very aggressive about coming up with different situations for employees to be in, which allows them to save a lot more money. Perfectly permissible. Again, this is kind of a gray area, so compliance is something we can be a little aggressive with, maybe regulated away, not to the extent where I think the government would challenge it. So it's about the right area of aggression, in my opinion. And their level of education, their level of advisement is going to allow them to save more money than their competitors, which is a natural advantage. It's what every business is looking for. So really want to caution you on that rule. Now, very quickly, if they're not going to an exchange, they go somewhere else, then they're not a problem. They're not going to impose a B tax liability on the employer. So Medicaid, Medicare, spouse parent plans, If you listen to WayFM, they advertise Christian health ministries all the time in the commercials. Those are exempted arrangements. They're not considered health plans, but they have the look and the feel of a health plan. They have a lot more strict rules, so it's not for everybody. What I would suggest is inform the employer about this so that the employer can inform the employees. And this does two things. One, the employer will help guide the enrollment of their employees to what works best for them, and it will wind up saving the employer money as well. And we like that, because if we're saving employers money, even by simple educational initiatives, then we're trusted advisors, we have long-term relationships. I'm going to just very briefly touch on Medicaid eligibility because I've got a lot of stuff I want to cover. Here's the chart. I invite you to take a look at it. If people have income below this chart, 100%, since we're not expanding Medicaid in Tennessee, but in states that do expand Medicaid, 138% of the federal poverty level, we want people signing up for Medicaid because from an economic perspective with the employer, if they sign up for Medicaid, we don't have to pay for them and they have no B-tax liability. We like that. Let's discuss very quickly some common strategies that you hear from employers and kind of workarounds to Obamacare. They're great if they work. The problem is they don't work. So the first is opting out, right? This is too expensive, I'm not going to do it. We covered this already. If you are subject to a penalty that you don't want to pay, an excise penalty, designing a health plan can be cheaper. It utilizes things like skinny plans, but in a much more sophisticated way, and I'm more than happy to go into detail on it with you. So I invite you to please ask me, and we can get into those kind of plan design discussions. But it's just a sophisticated response that'll be cheaper than the opt-out penalty, and I think it only makes sense for employers who have those difficulties. Breaking into subsidiaries, control group rules still apply, just like they always have to these types of situations. So I make 2 points about this. One, you can't take a 500 employee group and split it into 10, 50 employee groups, right? And even if you give them all different tax ID numbers, it doesn't matter, right? They all get conglomerated. Two, if you have clients who have majority ownership in different businesses, then you need to let them know that they may be lumped together for Obamacare purposes. And so they may have a white-collar business on one side where everybody gets health care and a blue-collar business on the other where nobody gets health care. And they may be an applicable large employer because of that unknowingly. This is where payer play analysis comes into play very heavily. Control group analysis, very important. These are services that accountants can do for pay. So I highly suggest you look into these things for your clients. This could be a good opportunity not only for the client to get good service, but for LBMC to profit off of it. So it's a really good area that I suggest you pay a lot of attention to. Finally, recklessly cutting hours and positions. Darden Restaurants is one of my favorite Obamacare examples. Olive Garden, Red Lobster, those kind of restaurants, because they really have taken the kitchen sink approach. They're trying everything they can to eliminate Obamacare liability. They have joined a private exchange and canceled all of their health programs. They have also cut everybody's hours. No server can work more than 28 hours per week. Now, one reason I like that is because if a Olive Garden waitress comes into my office on January 1st and wants to file suit, I'll say absolutely, because this subjects them to potential liability. And two, they get to be the guinea pigs, so they're probably, I would say almost undoubtedly going to be sued over this. And I regret that for them. But when I advise my clients as an attorney, I always want to tell them, look, I'm not saying we would even lose the case, but why spend 5 years litigating it when somebody else can set the precedent for us? So we're going to let them set the precedent. The reason they'll be sued is under ERISA, Section 510 says that denial of access to benefits is actionable under ERISA. You can file a claim on it, and ERISA is an opt-out class action suit, which means if one person's ticked off, then everybody else is automatically joined in the suit if you have a half-decent plaintiff's attorney. And there are many very good plaintiffs' attorneys who take cases to the Supreme Court with ERISA that will be involved in this. See, all the participants will receive something in the mail. It says, if you don't want to be a part of this lawsuit that'll get you health coverage that you would love, send this back in and sign it. Nobody's going to send it back in because they never do. And you've got, so many different fights on your hand from the employer side. Again, it doesn't matter if you win the case if you have to fight the class certification at the federal court level, which can take years by itself. If you have to try and fight to stave off discovery and try and dismiss the claim, which you won't be able to because this is an area that needs precedent set. And then you have to go through discovery, which is, again, many years of what policy happened with this. Let's see all of your emails ever discussing the health plan, and we're going to pay a number of attorneys to sit in a room and literally look through emails and check yes, relevant, or no, not relevant for hours. And they hire groups of attorneys that do this. It's really not fun work. I'm really glad I don't have to do it, because all they do is they sit in front of a computer all day and hit the mouse about 10,000 times. And all of those attorneys get billed out at a billable rate from a big firm, and it adds up to a huge cost to the employer, which they'll never recover. So is it great for lawyers? Yes. But is it good for your clients? No, unless you advise law firms. So really be wary of these hour-cutting strategies. Now, that's the bad way to do it. What's the good way to do it? A look back and stability period. It's permitted under the law, and what it allows you to do is assess the average number of hours your employees are working, and you can adjust those hours as you go. So if somebody works for 6 months at 35 hours, and you say, well, I'm going to cut their hours to 25 for the rest of the year, thereabouts, because they're a variable hour employer, I'm permitted to do that as long as it's not a company-wide policy, then you have complied with the look back and stability rule provisions. You are compliant under the law. And you can classify that person, if your look-back period is a year, for a stability period of a year. So they can be part-time for 12 more months. Now, who performs look-back and stability periods? Well, it's most easily performed. I mean, I do it, but I have to get payroll data to do it. Who do I get payroll data from? Accounting firms. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to say, this is a value-added service. I mean, we could handle this for you. You could make money off of it or not. I mean, it's up to the arrangements that you create, but it could be a very good profit center. It again, serves the client very well, because if you classify someone as a part-time employee, they don't have to provide them coverage. They save a lot of money on that. And I bet you they would be willing to pay some of that money they save to you for doing it for them. So recklessly cutting hours and positions, I don't like it to begin with. When you can do it in a legal compliant way that helps earn your employer, a better profit in the end, I just think it makes sense to do it that way. Okay, so non-discrimination. There are many types. The worst, I think we've covered under 4980 Cap D. We'll talk about another way it props up here. We'll start with self-insured plans, because that's typically where health non-discrimination has existed. It's in 105H of the code. And if you're thinking to yourself, why 105H? You're talking about income recognition? Yes, because this is not a penalty that affects the business. And if you look at IRS Notice 2011-1, that's exactly what it says. If you offer more benefits to highly compensated individuals than non-highly compensated, HRAs are a great example. 1.105-11 in the regulations will give you everything you need to know about HRA non-discrimination. The excess reimbursements that the highly compensated individual receives is counted as gross income. It's recognized as gross income. So it's something we want to pay a lot of attention to. Could it be only about $2,000 for an executive? Yeah. And so, maybe that's a tax of $800 or $900 extra that they're having to pay. But will the employer, who doesn't really have a direct detriment from this, will they incur a huge wrath of the employee if they pay this? Absolutely. Executives hate this code section. They hate recognizing more income for doing nothing wrong from their perspective, right? All they did was join a health plan, and now they're paying more taxes without receiving an offset. It's horrible. I mean, it just drives people nuts. So usually the employer has to gross them up. Now, is that gross up a huge cost to the employer? Usually not. Again, you're grossing up $900. It's not a huge issue, but it is still an issue that you need to pay attention to. On the fully insured side, 105H only applies to self-insured plans. On the fully insured side, we see in Public Health Services Act 2716 that you have to apply 105H's rules to fully insured plans, and if they're not compliant, it's not an excess reimbursement, it's a violation of the Public Health Services Act. And if you violate the Public Health Services Act, in the back of the tax code 9815, you will see that that is actionable because it's under Chapter 100 of the tax code. It's actionable under 4980 Cap DB. What's that? That's our horrible $100 per person per day penalty. So if you have non-discrimination in a fully insured plan, the employer, and again, 2011-1 states this, the employer sees an excise tax. It's a direct employer penalty. It's really dangerous. Why does nobody talk about this? Because also in 2011-1, they said we're going to delay the enforcement of this. There are a number of issues. It's directly contradictory to other language of Obamacare. with this provision. All right, it doesn't make any sense the way they would try to enforce it now. And they recognize that, thankfully. So they're redoing the regulations. They've been working on them since 2011, so I'm not going to say they've been working on them hard, but when they come out, it will be a dramatic impact on all employer plans, all of them. Because if you look at something like food service industry, they have manager plans, right? Plans for managers. They don't offer a plan to anybody else. And they don't want to offer a plan to anybody else. Well, that would violate this provision. So count it up. 25 to 33 employees on average per fast food store, per fast food store. And you've got a lot of penalties per day that are stacking up for that employer. If they have a franchise of multiple stores, that only, aggregates their problems. I'm going to talk about state exchanges for about 30 seconds. They're not actual health coverage, it's a bridge to coverage. Individuals have to comply with certain conditions, like filling out an application to qualify. Insurance companies have to qualify in a certain way as well. And you put them together and they both get a better deal, or so the theory goes. They are the government's baby. They want to protect them as best they can, because if the exchanges fail or if they cost too much, it's a huge embarrassment, again. This is the chart of where exchanges are, if they're different or not. If you have a business who has employees who live in Tennessee and some who live in Kentucky, you're dealing with two different exchanges. So that has a number of impacts. I would suggest that if you're dealing with this appeals process that I mentioned at the very beginning, these audit appeals, and you're dealing with multiple exchanges, you're going to get no benefit dealing with one exchange compared to the other. I don't even know if you're going to get a benefit dealing with the same exchange for multiple employees, because Lord knows they've had a lot of communication issues lately in these exchanges. So I'm not exactly seeing those improving. So let's wrap it up, because I know I'm getting close to my time. What does an employer need? We've gone over pretty much everything that they're subject to and all the issues that they can incur, but let's try to make some procedures out of this or systematize it a little bit. First, they need to be classified. Applicable large or small, and then large group, small group, or self-insured markets. They need these classifications to know how the law is going to affect them specifically. They also need control group analysis. They need some sort of, again, who's a full-time employee, these look back and stability periods, these how am I affected type things, services. They're going to need those. They're going to need to minimize the number of full-time workers they have. Every employer stands to gain from this. Is it bad for the employees? Yes. Will every employer want to do it? No. Some employers will say, I'd rather offer coverage. I'd rather keep my people happy because I see a benefit in that. They're a FedEx. There's a lot of UPSs out there, though, and I would say there's more UPSs than there are FedExs. So you have to identify where your client's attitude are as far as what type of advice you want to give them. Then efficient plan designs. Again, if people have increased coverage problems and they would rather pay the opt-out penalty, they're going to need these efficient plan designs. And that's fine. We can do that for them. And it's a whole separate discussion. I'm not trying to gloss over it and say, like, ooh, this is magic legal stuff. I'm just saying it's be another 2 hours, and I don't want to keep you guys that long. But I'm more than happy to discuss those afterwards. Assistance with reporting requirements. This is another great service that LBMC can offer. 6056 states that all of these employers are going to have to self-report their compliance with the employer mandates. Who are they going to turn to do that? Obviously, they're going to turn to their accounting folks. So this is another service you can let them know, look, we've got you covered here. We can help handle these issues. And I think it'll be a great value add for the firm itself. And then finally, education and assistance with questions. I'll address this on the next slide. How can LBMC help? First step is be proactive. Get out there and let your clients know, look, healthcare reform is coming. It's probably going to be here no matter what we want to do about it, and we've got to react to it. We can't put our head in the sand. We don't have to have a plan next year, but we have to have a plan about what our healthcare is going to be for the future. So if we're not doing one next year, we need to be ready for 2015, and we need to be ready for the implications of 2014. There are fair labor standards, protections, whistleblower protections for employees who receive a government subsidy. That hasn't been delayed. They are protected in their workplace from adverse employer actions, regardless of whether they cause an excise penalty or not. For some employers who see a lot of litigation from their employees, this is a huge issue. They need a plan in place next year, quite frankly, because they'll just see increased claims. In a right-to-work state like Tennessee, they can circumvent state employment laws by going to FLSA at the federal level. So this is a very important implication that some employers will say, you know what, that means we need something in 2014. Or some employers may say, you know what, our compliance is in shambles. We need something together for all these appeals we're going to have to make in 2014 for our employees who qualify for subsidies. This employer mandate delay was not a year to take off. It just means our planning changed. So we are creating a PPACA checklist, and we are going to distribute it to everyone. You can send it to your clients. You can go over it with your clients and say, are you ready for this stuff? Here's a list of what you need to do. If you haven't done it yet, we can help you with it. It's going to be a really good asset, I think. We can also assist in a lot of services, the reporting requirements, control group analysis, look-back stability periods. This is ways that LBMC can directly provide services which will be a benefit to the client, benefit to LBMC. I just think it's a wonderful opportunity. And a lot of accounting firms, I'll just let you know, do not have these capabilities. They're not looking at doing this kind of stuff. They look at healthcare and they say, healthcare, what does that have to do with accounting? So you can really take advantage of this, not only to your client's benefit, but I think to your own industry's benefit. And then finally, utilizing firm assets. So we're creating a library of knowledge that you can either direct employees or clients to, or you can look at yourself. Really excited about this. It's going to be very comprehensive. We're going to be generating a lot of content upcoming, so we'll keep you in the know about that. We're also going to be providing education, articles, notices as the law changes. This is, I don't know if you could tell, but this is really all I do all day. I just sit here and wait for something to pop up that says, oh great, something else changed. And I keep reading about it, right? So finally, and that leads to, I guess, a little bit of me, is legal support. I am retained by LBMC to assist you in becoming more knowledgeable and becoming a better advisor for Obamacare. Please utilize me. If you want my contact information, it's on these slides. I can also give you a business card. I'm more than happy to discuss this because this is really, and my wife will be really happy too because I don't have to talk about it with her. If you want some assistance, I can help you. If your clients need legal assistance to do complicated matters for which LBMC does not want malpractice liability on, I'm available for that as well. It's what I advise my clients with for the most part. So by all means, and I'm not trying to plug my own services. If you know another competent healthcare reform attorney, I absolutely get them involved, But if they need something, please access those services and utilize what you have. I think we're over our time, and I do apologize for that. I will touch very briefly on some industries just to get some ideas flowing about different ways that different industries are affected by Obamacare. Food service and hospitality, they have a lot of turnover and they have a lot of increased coverage problems. Minimum wage workers are very common. There are some locations that you have, like a 24-hour shop, where you're not going to be able to hire part-time to work the graveyard shift. It just doesn't happen. People won't work there. So you have to have full-time employees. I've got a client and they are in the food service industry. They have 1,300 employees. 450 of them are going to be full-time, no matter what. They don't have 450 managers or shift leaders, but that's just the way it happens because they have to have people working those hours to operate the stores. Landscaping, H-2B guest workers, and any lawfully present person in the United States is subject to Obamacare. You cannot say, oh, well, they're an immigrant or they're not a citizen and I don't have to provide them coverage. You do have to provide them coverage. And that's something that not a lot of people are aware of. They also have operational difficulties. They have almost no part-time workers in landscaping because your projects do not last 6 hours a day or something like that, right? They can't call people in 3 days out of the week to assist on a project when they need them for 2 weeks and maybe some weekends. You see that in construction as well. And there's a lot of similarity between landscaping and construction. So I'll just jump down and say, unlawfully present individuals or illegal immigrants, they do not have to be provided coverage. And funnily enough, they're not subject to the individual mandate. So I guess that's an exemption if you want to think about it like that. But frequently, those individuals will obtain Social Security numbers fraudulently, and they'll be paid through those numbers. Now, what does that mean for the employer? Well, they have a rock and a hard place. They can either say, oh, we're just paying these individuals with a fraudulent Social Security number knowingly, but we're not going to offer them health coverage because we actually know they're illegal immigrants. Well, great, you've just now invited a host of claims on your business. Or they can say, well, okay, we'll just pretend like we know we are already to treat them as if they were lawful citizens, and we're going to continue to pay them and offer them health coverage. So it's not really much of a break for the employer. In the agriculture world, seasonal workers rule. People come to pick, people come to plant. If it's the same people, they're probably not considered seasonal under the law. 120 days in a calendar tax year for the employer is seasonal status. Anything above 120 is a full year, full-time employee. So we want to be mindful of that. They also use a lot of guest workers. And finally, middle and upper management. I've been talking a lot about the lower paid employees and non-highly compensated individuals. And that's usually where the problems arise. But you have a lot of businesses, especially in the PEO, that are being offered to white collar individuals, management and above. What's going to happen to them? They're going to see individual issues. You may have executives that say, well, what's going to happen to my health plan? I know that I called in somebody from HR, the benefits department, to kind of explain this, but it really didn't make much sense to me. I want to know how this is going to really affect me. This is a great way, by the way, to say, I'll help you with your plan. Now let's take a look at the whole business. So it's a good marketing strategy, I think, as well. But you need to know that they will have benefits change. Again, this whole line of, oh, your coverage isn't going to change if you already have it, it's a farce. I mean, it's going to change. It just depends on how is it going to change. And I'll be very honest, when it comes to individuals, there are some winners and there are some losers in this. But typically, when you get into the middle and upper management, usually it's losers. We're usually paying more for the same thing, or we're getting more benefits that we're never going to use and paying for that instead. Every plan is going to have childhood immunizations. Middle and upper management, if you don't have kids that are going to get those, and they're subject to very stringent rules about when the immunizations can be provided, you're paying for somebody else's immunizations. I mean, that's the only way it can happen. So we need to be aware of those, and of course I'm really happy to help. I can get way deep in the weeds if you want on that, and also let them know that the costs are going up. And it's a cost-shifting statute, just to bring it all the way back to the beginning. It's not a cost-saving statute. There may be cost savings in the future. If they get 50 million people on state exchanges like they project on the CBO reports, then maybe that would be good. But signing up even 1,000 people a day in Kentucky ain't going to do it. So it remains to be seen whether they're going to achieve the level of parity they think that could invite potential cost savings. If you talk to any actuary, I'll tell you, or underwriter, none of them are expecting costs to go down. They're all expecting costs to go up, and we need to prepare our business clients that these costs will probably go up, not only for individual premiums, but for the business as well. And so we need to look for savings anywhere we can to try and mitigate that. We have the opportunity to provide that good advice, so I think that can bring a lot of benefit to the client and to our respective firms. So I look forward to that level of partnership. Again, if anybody needs me, I'll be right here. And thank you so much for your attention. Sorry for going over a little bit. I appreciate it.